So the next presenter is Albert Frantz. He is quite extraordinary as a speaker today. He's a concert pianist, Fulbright scholar, Börsendorfer artist, Ironman triathlete, and is among the most frequent contributors to the TEDx platform. A documentary about his life and work was released in 2015. In October 2016, Albert was the cover story for Toastmaster magazine in 142 countries. He's the head of mission of our organization, a Diplomatic Council in Vienna, and he speaks on issues of human rights and societal justice. I invite Albert to give his speech.
Thank you. I'd like to start with a personal story. I grew up in Pennsylvania with 3 siblings adopted from Asia. They always knew that they were adopted, and I always knew that I was the natural child of our parents. Our family was, however, torn apart by violence. It wasn't violence imposed from the outside, it was violence from within. When I reconnected with my estranged sister a number of years ago, she told me, "That man used to drag me around the house by my hair, but he took everything out on you, Albert." And indeed he did, with at least 1 or 2 violent acts a week throughout my entire childhood. There was no safe space. There were over 1,000 incidents of violence, to say nothing of the psychological abuse. Sometimes my mother wouldn't let me go to school for days or even a week at a time until the wounds healed. The external wounds did heal, but the psychological damage never could. Eventually, he started taking his anger out on our mother. I could still hear her scream in my mind. One time he nearly strangled her. The police and the ambulance came. He fled from the police. It was in the local newspaper. The family secret we so anxiously kept for all those years was now no longer a secret. But it turns out our family had another secret, and that secret was my own identity. When I was turning 30, I learned from former family friends and neighbors that the man I grew up with was not my father. My father was presumably a medical doctor, and that's all my parents were told by the fertility clinic. While my siblings always knew that they were adopted, I was never supposed to know my own identity. Now, in my individual case, I have no doubt that not being my social father's biological child was a factor in his treatment of me. Let me make it crystal clear that I am in no way conflating the issues of domestic violence and reproductive technology. Most donor-conceived and adopted children are fortunate to grow up with loving and supportive parents. And there are supporting data for this, certainly in the case of adoptees. Genetic relations are not required to love and support a child. Nonetheless, identity and the lack of connection to biological parents and the love and support from them, and siblings and extended family as well, is still very much an issue for many adoptive and donor-conceived children and adults. But should the well-being of a non-biological child be endangered, would it not be in the best interest of the child to seek to bring him or her under the care of their missing biological parent? The biological parent is a permanent, invisible presence in the child's life and in that family, even if the child remains unaware. The UN Convention on the Rights of the Child from 1989, ratified by 199 countries, the only exception so far is the United States. This convention seeks to act in the best interest of the child. I won't go into too much detail, but Article 19 seeks to protect children from violence by their parents or their caretakers. Article 9 says that state parties shall ensure that a child shall not be separated from his or her parents against their will, except in cases of abuse or neglect, for example, by involving the parents. The Convention on the Rights of the Child also recognizes a child's right to his or her own identity. Identity is the very core of human psychology. It's recognized by the United Nations here as a fundamental human right. Yet this right is clearly violated by reproductive technology and adoption in the way that they are widely practiced throughout the world today. Having one's full identity withheld has dramatic effects on the well-being of children and the adults that they become, even if they grow up in a healthy family. Now, human beings are not tabula rasa. We are not blank slates. There are too many separated twin studies at this point that prove the power of nature time and again. But an important point is recognizing the power of nature does nothing to diminish the power of nurture. We need both, and yet it makes it impossible to argue that nurture is all that matters. Article 8 of the Convention states that state parties undertake to respect the right of the child to preserve his or her identity, including nationality, name, family relations, as recognized by law without unlawful interference. Now, there is a loophole in the wording of Article 8. The wording leaves open the possibility of redefining the term parent to suit sometimes political aims. However, no redefinition of parent can change biological reality. Separating children from biological parents can leave them highly vulnerable to issues of identity, feelings of displacement, and attachment issues. There's a whole literature, particularly on adoptees, that can confirm this. So there is currently a trend to redefine legal parenthood to a social rather than a biological construct in law. Canada and the UK are examples. This is seen understandably as justice for the LGBT community in particular. Now, it should be clear that same-sex couples can be perfectly loving parents to a child, so I'm not arguing against the LGBT community. Rather, social justice can only be achieved when there is justice for all parties involved. After all, the very purpose of law is justice. If creating justice for one group simultaneously creates an injustice for another group, can this properly be called justice? Now, there are a number of ethical issues surrounding donor conception. The practice is ethically fraught, to say the least. One is anonymity of donors. Another is the number of children per donor. There are hundreds in many cases of sperm donors. Another is commercialization in many countries. It's actually a multi-billion-dollar industry, the fertility industry, every year. Another issue is involving commercialization is the sale of gametes. Some people actually literally make a business out of selling their sperm or eggs. Another is commodification. Some of us, I can feel in the donor-conceived community can feel like our very existence is a commercial transaction. But I'd like to propose just a few solutions. Number one is, first and foremost, I think we need to honor both biological and social parents. Two, we have to ban anonymous donation. This has already been done in numerous countries. Three, if the practice is to exist, and I don't see it going away, then I think the least we could do is open source the practice of gamete donation. Four, ban commercialization. This has already been done in numerous countries. Five, limit the number of children per donor to something reasonable. Six, recognize the right to identity. There was a ruling by the Bundesgerichtshof in Germany, their Supreme Court in 2015, that just came into effect a few months ago, and Germany has recognized children's rights to know their identity, or know the identity of a formerly anonymous gamete donor, regardless of the age of the child. I think this could become a model for the EU and for other countries. And finally, two more points. One is, I'd like to suggest some revision to the Convention on the Rights of the Child. Instead of using the term both parents, recognize that some of us have 3 parents, or some of us have 4 parents. And so replace both parents with all parents, and remove loopholes that favor the legal redefinitions of parenthood that only recognize one type of parent but not the other. And finally, birth certificate reform. Let's place the name of all parents on birth certificates. Spending years searching for one's identity should be the stuff of fiction and not real life. We don't want an identity that we're assigned. We want our identity, and that ought to be our birthright. Finally, only a few months ago, after many years of searching, I at long last found my family. I spent countless hours querying DNA databases, poring over thousands of distant relatives, triangulating DNA segments in search of a clue to a last name, grasping at straws, getting my hopes up only to have them dashed time and again. And finally, just the other month, I got a definitive match. I'm incredibly fortunate to have been wholeheartedly welcomed into my new family. I feel a sense of belonging for the first time in my life. I also feel a sense of safety and security in a family for the first time. And finally, I feel a sense of inner peace that I never knew was possible. Not everyone is so fortunate. If the intent of the Convention on the Rights of the Child is honored and laws around the world are changed to fully honor both nature and nurture, a step towards justice can be made.
Well, thank you very much, Albert. We'll take Q&A after Dr. Kelly. So